Alright, spoilers for School Life. Whoa, finishing watching that story feels like getting hit by a ton of really sad bricks. Last warning, this first episode in the entire series is best watched not spoiled. Have fun, good luck, and don't die. Now that I've thoroughly warned you, I can talk about the fact this story is brutal. It's deeply psychological, tragic, and above else, beautiful. It's so beautiful that I finally learned how to spell the word beautiful. Beautiful. Anyway, it's not that important. Yuki is the main character of School Life. The first episode's from her perspective, and did I mention she's very delusional? Not in a fun way. She was traumatized by the sudden appearance of zombies in her school, and more than that, the loss she felt from that day forward. The thing that pushed her over the edge was the loss of her teacher, Miss Sakura. In this video, I'll discuss Yuki as a character and the battles she goes through in order to regain her sense of reality. First, I'll go over what we can tell about her as a person from before the series starts. Second, I'll discuss the incident that made her lose touch with reality. Third, I'll go over her thought process while she's like that. Then I'll discuss how her friends dealt with it and how they made her brain struggle a little more when it was trying to fix itself. Lastly, I'll discuss how she overcame what she did and what her motivations were. By the way, I hope you know when I say Megane, I mean the fake one, the delusion. But when I say Miss Sakura, I'm referring to the real one, the person. Alright, let's get into it. From what we could tell before the outbreak, Yuki was considered weird by her peers. We see her normal behavior in her delusions and in flashbacks. In the first episode, she could be seen sleeping in class, forgetting her duties, and confusing the people around her. This didn't actually happen, but as we'll get to later, her delusions are reflections of how things went before the outbreak. She was strange, and based on the fact that she brings it up a lot when she's lucid, and the fact that she mentioned it in the finale, it seems like she either heard it a lot or it really bothered her. Either way, she was impacted by those words. We can see during the images of the past we see in the second to last episode that Yuki has a lot of self-esteem problems before and after the outbreak. She reminds me of Sailor Moon, and don't worry about spoilers, but Usagi is often underestimated by her peers and others. And from what I could tell watching it with my family, even though I haven't seen more than 40 episodes, it seems like she shares the same problem Yuki does. They both want to do things, they're both extremely outgoing and friendly, but they feel like they get shut down by others. I think that's likely how Yuki felt for a long time because she struggles with school. Tests are hard for her, like we saw in Sakura's episode. We also get glimpses of the real strength that Yuki has. It isn't easy to go to a place where you struggle and still find joy and reasons to go. Oftentimes when things are difficult for a person and they don't really see it getting any better, they quit, but Yuki is not like that. Yuki was a senior, and even though she was struggling, she didn't get held back, and she made it to her senior year. Even when she was delusional, she goes to school every day. We hear some of her reasoning in the finale, that speech that she gives specifically. She states that even if it's hard and not everyone gets along, she still loves school. I think that shows real bravery and strength to keep coming back to a place where you may not feel welcome and are always struggling, but still find a reason to keep going and never giving up. That's a truly strong and amazing trait for her to have, as well as it shows her true character. She can find the good even when she's called weird and struggles a lot. We also see signs that this is what led to her grief. She grew to love school even with all its challenges, so when she lost it, she felt a ton of grief. Even more than that, the thing that pushed her over the edge was the loss of... Miss Sakura will get her own video, so don't worry. But for now, I'll describe Miss Sakura's death was how it was the last straw that broke the camel's back, and what led to Yuki losing touch with reality. After the outbreak, Yuki started to cry all the time, until the School Life Club. The same day that it was created, however, Miss Sakura died. Yuki was crying from pure grief and hopelessness. She saw what Kurumi had to do on the roof and didn't want to lose any more people. She felt sad, but the club gave her a brief moment of joy since she felt as though it would give them something to do and hope that they could work towards accomplishing things. Unfortunately, when the rain started, they were overwhelmed by the zombies and Miss Sakura sacrificed herself to save the girls. Miss Sakura sacrificed herself, and Yuki had to be pulled away from the door, screaming her lungs out. After that happened, Yuki lost touch with what was real. I'll go into it some more in the next section, but there was likely a strange period we didn't get to see. The one where Kurumi and Ri had to see Yuki in that state for the first time. Now, I'd kill to see that. But Miss Sakura's death was such an important one in the story because it was the last thing that Yuki couldn't handle before she decided not to deal with any of it. We can see throughout the story that Miss Sakura is a figure of comfort and security for Yuki, and this loss was devastating. Yuki is also the kind of person who would fight to save anyone, especially those she cares about. Knowing that's the kind of person that she was makes this moment hit even harder, because we know that if the others had let her go, Yuki would have done whatever she could to save Miss Sakura. But it was already too late. Miss Sakura helped them all in the end, but she'll get her own video for that. Now that the last straw has been addressed, let's talk about the breaking part. One important thing to note about Yuki's delusions is that they aren't based on what she wants in the sense of her perfect world. She still sleeps in class, people still call her weird, and she still has misunderstandings, but the thing that makes her delusions interesting is the fact that they're based in reality. She isn't imagining a perfect world where everything works out. She's trying to feel like things never changed. She still attends class, thinks that everything is fine, but not perfect. This is very telling because it speaks to her grief. She is grieving the many losses that she experienced, and that's why she thinks she's still at school and everything is normal. Two delusions give us the deepest understanding of what her mind is doing. Those are the school and Megane. In the first episode, we see the two interact in her inner world. The school is Yuki's way of not confronting her trauma or grief, and Megane is her connection with reality. Megane acts as Yuki's conscience, whenever Yuki is in danger or is unable to understand her priorities because her delusions are obstructing her, it's Megane that tells her what to do. When she's running recklessly, Megane will appear and remind her to walk indoors. When you remember that during that episode the whole floor is covered in broken glass and infected blood, you understand why Megane told Yuki to walk and to be careful. Another example is when they're participating in the trial. Kurumi tells Yuki that she isn't nearly scared enough, and Megane peers immediately. This is because Yuki acts the way her delusions would have her act, but when that isn't appropriate, like when their lives are in danger, Megane acts as a guide to make sure that Yuki doesn't get them killed. It's an important aspect of her mental state because without Megane, Yuki couldn't survive. The real moment that showed this was the case was off-screen, but mentioned multiple times. Yuki almost went home, but Megane stopped her. I repeat, Yuki almost went home, but Megane stopped her. When Yuki told that to the group, I think that was her cry for help and to be watched more carefully. This happens with a few characters throughout the series, but when a character feels as though they can't trust their judgment, they either tell the group or just Ri. This is important because Yuki was admitting that her delusions put her in danger. Even if it's not what Yuki was consciously doing, it is what she was doing nonetheless. Megane is a very important to keeping Yuki safe, and we often see that Megane will save Yuki's life, like in the library during the trial. By the way, if you're enjoying this, please like and subscribe. We also see that Yuki is very sensitive about Megane being acknowledged by others, and that's a part of why she isn't even acknowledged to be real longer than the first episode. It's not revealed that she's an illusion for quite a while, and the reason the twist works is because Yuki talks to Megane all the time. But that wouldn't work without... That wouldn't work if she wasn't there. The other character struggling on whether or not they should tell Yuki the truth and make her confront it was my favorite conflict of the story, and it's clear to see why. We find out that Miki cares about Yuki deeply and doesn't feel comfortable with lying to her. We see that Kurumi was hesitant but learned just to live with it, and even found a way to still respect Yuki as a person. Ri was the #1 champion of Yuki's delusions, which bit them all later. During the early parts of the story, that conflict was building and growing. I thought that Miki and Ri were going to fight or something, but that didn't end up happening. Miki kept bringing it up over and over again, but Ri would usually talk her down, and Miki kept bringing it up. But, Ri would just talk her down. This was super interesting to watch, and the reasons why were even more compelling. Miki is someone who values the truth even if life is miserable. Ri is someone who values joy even if it's based off of lies. There's a spectrum I created for this story, and they are the champions of each side. The major theme of the story is in the middle. It's that in life we have to face the truth or we'll be unprepared for what comes, but still have to find a way to experience joy so we don't fall into despair. Miki actually reached the near middle before the story even started. We find that out in the flashback episodes. She went from only valuing the truth even if she lived a miserable life, and then when she fell into despair, she was going to die because her desire for joy would get her killed, like when she kept trying to leave the room because she kept hearing things. That's why when the escape came, she went, and she was more on the joy side than the truth side when that happened. She was closer to the middle, but she overshot it. Ri was fully on board for the joy side for a while. But eventually, Miki's words got through to her, and it was about then when it all went wrong. Yuki had started to process, and when she was in a state where she could see inconsistencies and start to piece reality together, Ri's influence on the group backfired. Her words to the others got in the way. Kurumi, someone who only follows orders, stepped in when Ri didn't. Kurumi told Yuki an obvious lie, and Yuki couldn't handle that. Yuki's mind was trying to fix itself, and outside validation was really important to her. We see throughout the story that characters are often faced with the dilemma on whether or not to lie to Yuki. Kurumi struggled with it off-screen for a while, and Miki struggled for a while too. Miki didn't want to lie to Yuki at all for a time. But when her worries about Yuki were quelled, when she felt she got heard during that conversation at the sink, that made her more lax on the subject. Ri wanted nothing more than the group to be happy and safe. And when she realized that what she was doing to Yuki was hurting her, she wanted to stop. But it was a lot harder since her responsibility as leader and her mistakes impeded her. She made a bad call as the one in charge, so when she changed her mind, those who followed her orders still followed them. So, after what happens when Yuki started to piece things together with the conversation about the car, Yuki went to go be alone and with what she was dealing with. This is a pretty good time to mention how these characters handled the situation. They aren't pros, so helping Yuki was far out of their range of possibilities. The brain does have ways to fix itself, and tries to, like we'll get into later, but it really was their ignorance that got in the way of them helping out their friend. When Yuki was realizing her delusions didn't match with reality, she was in a certain state. In that state, a mind is more open to change. It's because of that she felt she needed to be validated, but lies hurt her more. When she went to be alone after she was lied to, she was still ended up partially accepting and dealing with the truths behind her delusions in spite of what happened. She went to the last place she saw Miss Sakura, and the conversation that followed is very important to the story, but I have to save that for the next section. As Yuki's brain kept trying to recover, Ri's influence kept getting in the way, like it did when Ri straight up tried to tell Yuki to remember what she saw when Ri saw the picture of Miss Sakura, but unfortunately, poor timing. Yuki didn't even flinch, since she wasn't in the right state of mind for change. Bummer. Miki also didn't help by lying to Yuki. It's so weird to see Miki during that period because that was nearly the last time that she did that. But it makes a ton of sense in context. Even towards the end, Miki and Ri were getting in the way of Yuki's freedom from delusions. But it didn't work, and soon she'll be able to for real. Be able to what? Be able to... Yuki didn't want to be delusional or to get in her friend's way or to ignore reality. What she wanted was for things to go back to how they were before. How they were the last time she felt safe and when she got to be with everyone she cared about. Yuki cared about all of them, and it was her grief and trauma that made it all become an illusion. I mentioned earlier that the brain tries to fix itself, and that's very true. Not just physically, but for a neurotypical brain like Yuki's, delusions and hallucinations, when given enough room to heal, well, your brain is going to try to. Obviously, if you or a loved one is experiencing that stuff, don't leave them alone and don't be alone. That doesn't help anyone. What I'm saying is, to some degree, the brain tries to fix itself or at least be functional. Yuki's brain began to make those delusions in the first place because she felt unsafe and her grief and stress were too much for her to handle. That's not the end of it though. Brains also do this thing where they try to test you to see what you can handle when your brain is going through something like hers. And that happened to Yuki a lot, mostly in dreams. Her brain was trying to see if she could handle not being delusional anymore, and that's why she kept having all those nightmares where her friends would turn into zombies. She failed those tests, go figure, and that's why she would forget when she woke up, because it was too much for her to handle. The reason why I'm going over this stuff here, and not the section meant for that, is because it's complicated and very relevant to her getting better, and I'd rather not have you forget all this stuff by the time I talk about it. Not that you would, you're awesome, but still. Her brain's Sisyphean task of fixing her mental state was a hard battle that it kept losing. A huge part of why is because keeping all those hallucinations, both audio and visual, all the time, even the windows, takes a lot of brain power. I hypothesize that's why she sleeps so much and gets tested in her sleep. Her brain doesn't want to keep up all those hallucinations, but it will if it decides she really needs them. So, when she almost figured it out, it must have snapped his fingers in anger when Kurumi started lying. That's definitely nonsense, but it would be frustrating, and the scene with Yuki dealing with some of her grief with Megane was extremely impactful and important. Thanks to Ri's influence, Yuki was only half better after her convo with Megane. She also left Megane behind the door, which was her way of half accepting the truth. When Megane told Yuki that keeping a diary and talking to others was a good way to remember those she cares about even if they aren't around anymore, was her partially admitting that Miss Sakura was gone. That's also why Yuki left her in her last resting place, the last place she saw Miss Sakura and the last memory she had of her. That's why Megane only appeared as a voice to the door, and Yuki never made her appear outside of it after that conversation. After that, there are two major things that could have helped Yuki push past the halfway mark and go all the way into not having delusions. Under specific conditions and the right level of circumstance, a push could have helped her. The other, much better, option was if she slowly processed it more and more over time. Yeah, guess which one happened? Yep, the not ideal one. Yuki's main trait that sets her apart from her delusions is her willingness to help others, no matter what. When she heard Miki in the mall, they were strangers, and Yuki was in full-blown delusion mode, but she went back to save Miki anyway. I call this her mostly conscious state, which she enters multiple times throughout the story, but only when her delusions get in the way of her helping someone. Megane was right there and was worried, but didn't try to stop her. Her conscience knew she was in danger, but she disappeared. The reason why Megane disappeared was because Yuki needed the brain power to think quickly and for herself. Her brain understood that this was urgent, and it was more important that Yuki could act instead of feel safe. She was scared, but for someone else's sake, she could brave that fear. That's exactly what happened in the finale. When Kurumi came back bit, Yuki didn't hesitate to help her. One important thing to note is that Yuki is usually dependent on others for validation, especially when something doesn't fit the mold of her delusions. She does this with Miki when she can't see Megane, and she does it in many other instances as well. The reason I bring this up is because Megane was her tied to the real world, and when things didn't fit her delusions, like the zombies, But here, since she left Megane behind, she had to act herself without guidance for the first time since with Miki. It was because of this and the fact that she was halfway better that caused her to become even more aware. The throughline with the broken windows was brilliant. In the first episode, she's cold, so she closes a broken window. Then she thinks it's warmer, even though the window is visibly not helping with the wind. The second time this happens, she feels the wind in the cold, then realizes the window is broken. Oftentimes, her brain erases smaller details like that, and they can only be seen in glimpses. In the first episode, which takes place entirely from her delusions, there's a moment where she can see the windows as she moves, but she doesn't stop to look at it. Her brain is erasing these details because they stress her out too much, but her brain had healed to the point where she could acknowledge them, and the fact that they were broken. If she had been able to heal properly, then that would have been a huge leap in progress, and she would have slowly become more accustomed to reality. That didn't happen though. Bummer. She was faced with even more of her grief when her infected friend came from around the corner. She is stable long enough to save Miki, but then when Miki asks her to, she reverts back. The reason why this happens is simple. One, she views her friends as a point of stability and acknowledges multiple times through Megane and through her behavior that they take care of her and she needs them to survive. She doesn't want them to get mad at her and will even give them affection or say nice things to them so she doesn't feel like a burden. It's for her survival, and the trial was her brain's way of helping her to try to show the group that she isn't a burden by encouraging all of them, including her, to go get the supplies that they needed. So when Miki told her to be her usual self, she complied because she felt she needed to for security. That led to Yuki temporarily reverting back to what her brain was used to, which is her delusions, in order to do what Miki said. But what that caused pushed her over the edge, because Miki didn't feel like bringing Yuki was safe, so she left her behind. Yuki wants more than anything to help, and her being left behind while her friend was putting her life in danger was way too much for her. She had a dream because of that, and in that dream, her delusions, represented by those people, were getting in the way of her being there for her friends. When she got too overwhelmed by this, her brain brought in Megane. After a moment of brief calm, her brain tested her again by showing her an image of her friends surrounded by the danger they were currently in. Her brain wanted her to acknowledge the real danger her friends were in so that she could help them. She is also struggling because she is starting to see her delusions as obstacles. They are no longer helping her. They are getting in the way, which she understood after Miki left her. Yuki was too overwhelmed to do it herself and accept the full truth, so her mind brought in Megane's voice. It couldn't make Megane appear for two reasons. One is because in Yuki's mind, Megane is behind the door, and two, because she was starting to understand that she isn't there. So seeing her wouldn't make her feel better, which we'll see more of later. Yuki then does what Megane wants, which is actually what Yuki thinks she should do. Yuki had the brilliant idea of telling all the zombies to go home because the school day is over. But Yuki got caught at the Megane door. She is now confronting the source of her grief and the trauma that caused her to begin living in a delusional state. She tells Megane that she can't keep ignoring the scary things because she's afraid that she will lose everything she cares about. Before that happens, she's reminded of a moment where she made a promise to Miss Sakura to keep smiling. That was her way of finding a way to keep Miss Sakura around in spirit even if she's dead. Yuki dealt with a lot of grief in this story. My favorite example of her coming to terms with grief is the poem she read about stagnation and what it meant to her. I think she read it twice, once silently and the second aloud. She mentioned that she forgets things, and I think that reading it aloud was her way of making sure she didn't forget it. I think that her words to Miki were the most telling of her mindset. The fact that someone from 800 years in the past's feelings can be felt and understood in modern times made Yuki very happy. She was dealing with the grief of her classmates and teachers, but also grappling with her own death. That's why she wanted to write letters and send them in that episode. She wanted to use the power of literature to feel as though she will live on. She was dealing with the harsh reality that they could die at any moment, and she didn't want to feel that she would be completely lost. Something similar happened when she discussed how finding a letter would make her really happy. It would mean that there was another survivor out there that she could connect with. Whether she was fully conscious of it or not, she was dealing with a massive loss and loneliness. It's like Miss Sakura said, Yuki smiles all the time, and she does that because she finds joy in being around others. Living in an isolated world with only 4 people also made her grieve the loss of understanding and getting to know people she never got to meet. Yuki's love for other people is what led her to become delusional in the first place. So when she realized that the last real people around her could be lost if she couldn't shake her delusions, she did. She dealt with the traumatic aspect first. She dealt with the fact that she was ignoring those scary things, but she needed to stop. When she opened the door to see Megane and it was empty, that was her confronting that grief. She had not been able to have closure, but seeing the last place she saw Miss Sakura and never hearing or seeing Megane again as a hallucination after that was her way of accepting her grief. The speech she gave at the end was amazing, and it was her coming to terms with how things are. Her speech was about the acceptance phase of grief. Speaking of speeches, in this series, there are many talks about the future. Yuki first confronts the idea of the future with Megane. She decided to have a talk with herself, as we can see by the fact that she announced it to the others, as well as decided that that day was going to be the one where she would spend it with Megane. Megane brings up the future and looks visibly saddened by that. Since we know that Megane comes from Yuki's mind, we know the part of Yuki that could accept reality was sad about her future. Later, all the characters have a conversation about what they want to do after graduation. Yuki couldn't take part as much as the others because it had a double meaning she wasn't privy to, but it was still brought up nonetheless. Yuki thinking about the power of literature was also her looking into the future. I thought it was oddly important for something that was brought up by someone who wasn't really thinking about it. The first thing that changed Yuki's perspective on the future is when Yuki was talking about the future during the trial, Kurumi reminded her that they would eventually graduate according to her delusions, I guess. The small interaction is what led Yuki to start thinking about the future. And when she talked with Megane, she decided she wanted to become a more competent member of the group to contribute to her future, which is why she brought up the trial in the first place. Graduation was a major part of the story, and the ending hits harder now that I've graduated high school. The speech she gave at the end about moving on and going home because the school day was over was really great. They had to leave eventually, and when they did, they left it in the best way possible. They were able to graduate properly, and they got to leave the school behind. The funny thing about them leaving is that Yuki kept having to stop her friends from becoming delusional like she had been. When Miki lost Toromaru, she wasn't crying all that much. She wasn't processing her grief properly, and she'd started to even hallucinate. But Yuki was able to help her. That was close, though. The same thing happened later with Ri. She saw Megane and even started talking to her, but when Yuki saw that, she yelled for Ri, and that snapped her back to reality. Yeesh, that was a close one, too. The reason why is because all of them were at risk for that. They were all exposed to Yuki's way of thinking for a really long time, and they all just experienced a ton of traumatic events really quickly. Good thing Yuki found another role in the group, the one who keeps everyone happy and sane. Yuki is a really incredible character, and she goes through a lot to be there for her friends. By the end, she'll live forever as long as we can carry on her story. This was a ton of fun to rewatch and to make videos on. If you like this video, feel free to subscribe, hit the like button, and the notification bell. I make videos pretty regularly, and I will be talking a lot more about school life, so don't miss it. I also have videos in other series that I hope you enjoy. Thank you for watching.